Alright, we're going to take a look at Evolution by North Star Games. This is, I think, the first edition, and it's without any expansions. I've always been on the look. This is not what I had hoped to play, if you're following my What's Next list over on the Game Box. Or it's red. This isn't really what I hoped to play, but I found, wow, the rules to what I hoped to play are taking me longer to digest than I thought. They're larger than I thought they would be. So I remembered it being like a little 12-page rule book. And it's 30-something. Now, if you know my sort of gaming history and tastes, I am almost always on the lookout for some kind of evolutionary species competing type games. So far, most of them have failed in some significant way. For me, the two that really kind of triggered this desire the most, the first one was Quirks, which had you building these really cool animals. And this one takes some of Quirks, but it doesn't give you the animals in the same way, but it gives you a collection of traits, which you'll see later on in a game that later on in time, in a game I actually have covered. I haven't covered Quirks yet for whatever reason, which is American Megafauna, which is also a collection of traits. And that's actually a really, really cool game. The only negative to both this and American Megafauna is it doesn't give you a creature, built out of the cards to look at, which was one of the coolest little features of Quirks. As a game, it had its problems. The next was Tyranno X, which I always feel like if you combine that and Quirks, you would get something cool. And in a sense, American Megafauna is combining Quirks with a geometric or a geographical information, which is also, to me, kind of cool. And then some Euro-type things that I've looked at, Primordial Soup, Pangea. Maybe it wasn't Pangea. Pangea, I don't know if it had the animals on it. But there have been a number of these which don't really go into the details I want. Something like Dominant Species also didn't go into the details I want and had a lot of other issues. But for this game, I was actually somewhat pleased, and my wife and I have played it a few times. So let's take a look at how it works out. I haven't looked over the rules because I'm busy looking over other rules in a while, but we'll just try to work through them. Other people have covered them, so, if you want clearly explained rules, this isn't where you want to look. All right, so component-wise, it holds up to 6 players. Each player has one of these little baggies, and they're going to store their victory points, their food in this, stuff that they've eaten. Each player has a number of these, which are their species, and these are going to track some information. Down here is the size of the body, which has to do with what you can eat and how much food you're worth. The size of the population, which goes down when you get eaten or starve, and then the amount of food that you're currently eating, which you'll be able to score. Food is in this bag. It's divided into 2 types, basically to which side of the counter it's on, either plant stuff or animal parts. And obviously different kinds of animals eat different kinds of food. These little cubes are used in these tracks to mark the population and body size. This is going to be the general food supply that everybody works towards. Each player has their own player aid, which gives all the different capabilities. They're not very well explained here, and they're not necessarily terribly well explained in the cards. Sometimes you have to look up in the rules. The silly little scientific names, which isn't always the same, like those 2 are the same, those 3 are the same. Oh, I'm reading wrong. Okay, so here's a couple that are different. They give you a prefix and suffix based on these, and in general, critters will have a couple of traits. So you'll be able to come up with their name from their traits. Whatever. Okay. You also have this cool wooden dinosaur, which is, of course, the first player marker. Oh, I didn't explain the cards. So you also have these cards, which are these are kind of like CDG type cards. They have two values. They have a value here, which is how much food they're worth in one particular usage. And then they have a trait, which is what you create the critters from. They have additional uses beyond just food and traits. Sometimes you'll be discarding cards, using cards as resources. You see that in, I think Race for the Galaxy had that. And a number of other games have used that. I don't think it was the first, because I remember seeing it prior to it in some kind of collectible card game where you have cards and they are just sort of a resource that you use in order to complete the actions on the cards. Okay, so the goal of the game, you're going to score at the end of the game however much food you've put in this bag, however many population you have of all of your different species, and then any trait cards that are on your given species. For the actual play of the game, you're going to play until the deck runs out, and then you reshuffle the deck for a very short little segment. This is kind of annoying, actually, because the cards are not terribly easy to shuffle. Mine I bought it used, and they came in sleeves, and I of course took them out of the sleeves. But I remember these not being much easier to shuffle outside of the sleeves than in. Anyway, whatever traits your species have, you'll be scoring as well, as long as they're surviving species. There's special rules for 2 and 6 players, so maybe we'll be dropping a player depending, because I'm not sure I want to play with the special rules. We'll see what they are. I don't think we do. I think I want to drop down to a smaller number of players. So at the beginning of each turn, each player gets 3 new cards plus an extra card for every species they have in front of them. And I think in setup you have one of these. You have an empty species to begin with. Then each player is going to take one of their hand of cards, and they're going to base on a couple of things: what the ability of the card is and this number. This number is the important thing here. They're going to play cards face down in the food pile, and that's an amount of food that they're adding to the pile at the end of the turn. That's going to be food that's available for their species to eat. But of course, the number here isn't the only thing that you're considering, because you may also want this trait. Each player puts these face down, and then nobody knows how much food there is in the center. Then, starting with the first player, each player can play as many trait cards as they want, or they can save them in their hand. Now, when you play a trait card, you can just add it face down to one of your critters. Now, there's a limit to how many traits you can have in a particular species. In general, that's going to be 3 trait cards for any given species. In the 2-player game, I think it's just 2. If you already have 3 trait cards on your species, you're going to have to discard one to replace it. You have some limitations. You can't put a trait card that's already on that species. You can't double them up. Now, these trait cards are kind of interesting, because some of them, like this one, have an ability. When the species takes food, the species to the right takes a food from the same source. So it's got this little arrow saying, hey, if there's another species directly to my right, I get food there. Now, we've got some interesting questions based on how the rules are written, and I'm not someone to bother looking up for a little euro, whether there's some clarification there. We'll get to that in a little while as to what the ordering of your chain of critters is, because there's definitely limits on how you can manipulate that. Okay, you can create a new species. You just take one of your trait cards, discard it face up in the pile of discards, and you grab another species board. There has to be a species board available to do this, but there's a fair number of these. And you put it either, let's see, either to the left or right of your existing species. That's plural. They may not be placed between existing species. Which is to say, if I've got this, I can't squeeze one in here. That's obvious. But what if I've got this, and we can explain how that can happen? Can I slide it in there? Well, I would say no. The question is whether this can happen. And we'll see where the rules leave me on that. You can also discard a trait card face up and increase either the body size or population of your creature. And you do that by simply adding a cube to it. So, or we could just track it. So you could move the cube there. And that's what that's how they represent it. In 2 players, we just fill the thing with cubes, which really you're not supposed to do. Okay. And then the next player is allowed to play all their cards that they want. Once everybody's played their cards, any face down trait cards get flipped face up. And now we see what we're competing against. So there's this game of trying to outguess your opponent as to what kind of thing they're going to do, but you don't know what they have in their hand either. Then the next thing you do is you reveal the food cards that are here. You add up the total of all these numbers, some of which can be negative, and you add that much plant food to here. Okay. At this moment in the game, if you have a trait card that has a leaf symbol, it has an immediate effect at this point, and it probably gains some food. Then, starting with whoever the first player is, the guy with the Brontosaurus type thing, each player must feed one of their species, one of their hungry species. A species is hungry if it doesn't have as much food on the track as it has population at that moment. And it'll be able to take food through one of a couple of different means. And when it takes food, it fills up this with these little counters. Okay. So if it's a non-carnivore, the general rule is you can grab one plant from here and put it on your creature. You may have special abilities that increase the amount of food that you have or that hand food to other critters or whatever. And this takes place whenever you grab that food. If you have a carnivore, it can't eat plants. Even if it has traits like long neck or cooperation. They can only feed by attacking another species. Carnivores can continue to attack species even if there's no food in here for some reason. And that happens. It's usually a competition for that food. So in order to make an attack, the carnivore has to have a body size greater than the body size of the species being attacked. Greater than, not just equal. If the carnivore has traits, if the attacked species has certain defensive traits, the carnivore also has to be able to cancel all those out. If the attack's successful, you take meat from the food bank equal to the attacked species' body size, and the carnivore eats that. So carnivores can grab a lot of food at once. And you also reduce the population of the attacked species by 1. If this drops it below the food already eaten, the excess food will go in the food bag. They've already eaten it, you get score for it. If they go down to a 0 population, they're extinct, and their creature dies, and we'll explain extinction in a moment. Non-carnivores normally eat plant food, but they can eat meat if they have scavenger or cooperation. A carnivore can never eat plants. I assume these underlines, I don't know, they may have been in the rule book in printing, but they kind of look like they're pen, but they don't feel like pen. There's no indentation there. A species must eat if it's hungry and there's food available. This means a carnivore has to try to hunt either a species that might hurt it or even kill it, or one of your own species. A species can never grab more food than its population. Well, sort of. There's a trait that allows you to sort of do that. But the traits are like special abilities in a lot of games. They allow you to break the rules. Okay. When all species have either filled up their food equal to their population, or if the hungry species that are left can no longer get food from any source, the feeding section is over, If a species didn't eat food equal to its population will drop down to the amount of food it ate. If it didn't eat any food, it dies out and goes extinct. You grab all the food that you actually ate and put it into your food token bag. Any food that's left in the watering hole stays there. Any player with no surviving species gets a free new species. They don't have to throw a card for that. And then the start marker passes to the left, and I'll be going, of course, counterclockwise, as I always do. Okay. We can play the 6-player. It just has a speeding rule, which I think is goofy. End of game score. Okay, extinction. When you go extinct, when you get to a population of 0, the species board is sent back to the box, and the trait cards will be discarded, but you get trait cards equal to the number you just lost. So in a sense, you don't lose as much as it might seem. Okay, now what's notable here, let's keep going. If the deck needs to be shuffled, the next round will be the last round of the game. Any food that was on the species killed by the carnivore is placed in the food token bag. Okay, so here's the thing. It doesn't tell you what to do if you're in this situation and this species is killed. Do these counters stay where they are, or do they slide together? And that's important in terms of the fitting a new species into play. I don't know which way to do it. Table space may dictate that I have to slide them together. When I've played with my wife, we've usually left gaps, which is really problematic because you can't slide anything into the gap and there's nothing directly to the right. But to tell you the truth, the species to the right, it doesn't look like it says the species directly next to it. So it may, I think compacting is actually the proper answer here. The reason I didn't like that is the idea that this was cooperating with this species. Well, this species dies. Now it's cooperating with this species? What? But on the other hand, if you leave it blank, this no longer has a special ability, and that kind of sucks too. Okay. So if the deck had to be shuffled during the deal cards phase, the end of game scoring starts at the end of that round. If the deck had to be shuffled at any other time in the turn, you play another full round afterwards. And we already explained the points. Food in the bags, population size of the creatures, and the number of trait cards. Whoever has the most points wins. If there's a tie, the player with the most trait card points is the winner. If there's still a tie, the player with the most population points is the winner. If there's still a tie, you have to get pizza. Whatever. In 2 players, you pull a bunch of traits randomly out of the deck, and you only allow 2 traits instead of 3. I don't know if that's really necessary. I'm used to that 2 traits though, which is really, really tight to play with. Then there's a description of all the different traits, which is kind of vital because although they provide you with a play aid and they decide to give valuable space to silliness, they don't give all the information that's here either in the cards or on the player aid. In fact, the player aid is really just kind of a reminder. I think it's less specific than the cards, or no, it's maybe exactly what the cards say. This gives a little bit more clarity in some cases, though. And then there's a picture and a whole page for game design credits. Okay, so that's Evolution. I know there's a flying expansion to it, and then there's a later edition that I think combines that with the expansion with the base game to begin with. But this is what we're going to take a look at, and we'll get to playing it.